This is a grand production. I'm filming it from every conceivable angle, just to make sure I get everything. So,
Well done.
all right. Shall we begin?
We shall begin.
Yep.
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to thank you very much for participating in this assessment for me. Just quick introductions. We've got Paula, who's a learning management expert. Ross, who is a legal and educational expert. Trish, who is an aged care and disability expert. And me, I'm a student. So the idea of this assessment is to run through these templates that I've created to, these are units of assessment that are VET competencies, VET being vocational education and training. So the idea is I've created these assessments not having done the courses, and I obviously acknowledge that no one here has done these courses. So there's a little bit of suspension of belief involved in doing this. So I guess the idea is it's more of a sanity check on what I've written. Does it make sense? Is it something that you could see if you had done the course, you would think, yeah, that's a reasonable expectation for me to have been assessed in this fashion. But most importantly is that you have any changes or recommendations that's how we flesh them out here. So we go through them all around about 10-15 minutes for each one. So that's pretty much how I'd like to run it. Any questions before we kick off?
That all sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay, well the first one I'd like to start with is the BSB ITU 212, which is create and use spreadsheets.
Yep.
So this was a personal favourite of mine because I actually know how to create and use the spreadsheet, so I was quite pleased to be able to do this one. I found that the most of the instructions to the assessors was fairly basic because using any sort of computer application, you're going to need the basics: a computer, a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, a printer, a network. So in this particular unit, there was no real sort of hidden things that might sort of catch an assessor out. The methodology that I chose to use was mainly practical assessment. So running through a competency by virtue of, excuse me, let's get to the page, a portfolio. So the idea was that the student or the learner would create a portfolio based on a template. Now, I sent that template to you late, Paula, I'm sorry. So I don't know if you actually ended up seeing it or not. Ross picked up a copy this afternoon, so basically the idea was once you've done the course, you would be proficient enough in spreadsheet and charting to be able to create that spreadsheet and charts. So that was the idea, and that by doing it that way, that basically covered pretty much all of the performance criteria and the knowledge evidence and performance evidence that the unit of competency required. So that was the, if you look down the portfolio evidence checklist, which is on page 10, you can see there it's the elements of the performance criteria. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it covers 9 of them. And I can't remember exactly how many there are, but there's not that many more. So, based on what prior to the portfolio evidence checklist is the mapping. Now, the mapping and the instructions to the assessors is, if I just run through it with you, basically what it does is it takes every single competency that is required by the unit and breaks it down into criteria, and each criteria, by creating an assessment item next to it, I've tried to address every single one so as to capture all the units that are required and all the elements of competency that is required by the unit. So each unit has a whole series of competencies like benchmarks, and what a benchmark really means is, could you go out into the workplace and do this? And could you take it to different workplaces and keep doing it? So it's a repetitive skill and knowledge that you've acquired. So that's where that has been derived from So after mapping all the competencies, I've put it down into observation, written questions and a portfolio. So there are 3 different types of assessment instruments. So the observation only applies to the ergonomic component of the mapping. So that in the unit, it actually has a bit of a section on how to set up an ergonomic workstation, which is quite sort of, it was sort of out there on its own, a bit of an outlier. So that's the only one that was an observation. So the way I addressed that was I would actually observe the learner setting up a workstation. And if you look through back to the actual observation, which is on page 16, that is of the template.
The template.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm sort of jumping all over the place here, but
That's fine.
I'll smooth it out. Yeah, so page 16.
Yep.
So basically what it says there, assessor is to advise candidate they are being assessed on their proficiency in setting up their workstation in a manner that is in keeping with ergonomic principles. Now I just wrote that because I thought that covered pretty much what you need to know. So the candidate demonstrates they have an understanding of how to set up a workstation. You know, without going into detail on it, I think we've all set up enough workstations and been across ergonomics principles long enough to know what they are required to do, and so that the observation points are taken directly from an ergonomic organisation.
Right. Would they have to meet any of their organisation's WHS requirements? You know,
They would, Ross, and that, yes.
I've worked for.
Yep.
They do have quite specific requirements.
Yep. And I've actually addressed that in the instructions to assessors on page 3. So there's a section there, before starting the assessment, the candidate will also need to be briefed on any relevant areas below. And that was the first one there, is workplace health and safety.
Okay.
So that was addressed in that section there. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
There it is.
So, so that was the only observation component, or instrument, excuse me. The other 2 were written questions and the portfolio. Now the portfolio had a template, which I'll go back to that. And that was a spreadsheet, which I don't have on me, but I do have, if I share the screen, I'll just briefly share the screen and show you. Where is it? It's not there. It doesn't have enough. Didn't work. I've got too many things open. It's not going to work. I'll try this one.
I did a copy of it.
Do you have it open?
Yeah, I do. It's when I do share screen,
Yeah.
it came up, but it didn't. All these other ones came up, but not it. Oh, there it is. Got it. It's time to share. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the budget. Yep.
So that the idea of this is that would be given to the participant as a soft copy on a floppy disk or USB stick. Excuse me, showing my age there. And so there is the worksheet part of it. So being able to put in data, put in formulas, do formatting, do font changes. So that's the first component. And if you scroll down, or as I scroll down, you'll see there's charts that relate to the the tables. Excuse me. So that's basically the idea. Is you can set up a worksheet. You can do sums on it. You can add data to it. You can change it. You can save it. You can add charts from it. You can save it, close it down, open it up again, and make edits, and just continuously build on it. So that's where the idea of the template came from. So just being given that. Sorry, Paula?
You would present that to them as a template and then give them the opportunity to
Yeah.
work with it, so changes, become competent users?
No, my idea was actually they would build it from scratch. So I'll give them a copy of it, and they would actually have to recreate it
Okay,
on their own. So that would be given to them as a hard copy. So I think I said soft copy, but I meant hard copy. So that would be given to them as a on paper, like I gave one to Ross earlier today, and or you could give it to them as a PDF. It doesn't really matter what the format is, as long as it's there for them to see. And then they would then be required to recreate it. Now, if there was variations in what font they used or underlining or that's entirely up to them. That's, you know, showing a bit of flair is nothing wrong with that. But as long as the competencies were being able to enter data, enter formulas, do formatting, do fonts and charts. They were the 5 things that they were required to do. And so I think by doing it this way, that was, from my way of thinking, the best way to cover it.
yeah. And can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
If they didn't know how to do it, how would you approach that?
Aha. Now, this is where they've just done a course on how to do, so this is where this gets a bit awkward, I think, because they've done a course on how to create and use basic spreadsheets. So this is the assessment side.
Yeah.
So part of the course would have been how to do it. How to,
Yes.
you know, open a spreadsheet, put data in, do formulas. I've done Excel courses years and years ago, but this is the sort of gap in this whole sort of assessment, not the assessment I'm reading off, but the one we're talking about, because it's sort of like you have to pretend you've just done the course and you're being assessed.
Yep.
That's sort of, but good question. If they came back and said, I don't know how to do this, the assessor would be there to help them, because this would be a classroom environment. So they put their hand up or they tap on the shoulder and say, I'm stuck, I don't know even how to start. I guess then the assessor would be required to then
By
give
the
them a
end
hand.
of the course, they should be competent enough to recreate this, or they.
That's the idea, yes. So the assessment is based on the idea that they've done enough in the course to be able to do this. There's nothing in the assessment that's not part of the requirement of the course.
Yeah.
Um,
And then,
so-
but you have a NYC, you're not yet competent.
Well,
Yeah.
perhaps, yes, you could, and I think if I look back and how I addressed that on the, and that was addressed in the guides to assessors, procedure if NYC, which is on page 4, and I wrote about if the candidate is assessed as not yet competent, the following options will be available to them. For the visual ergonomic assessment, they can repeat the setup after a debrief as to what areas of deficiency were identified. The written questions will be marked, and if deemed unsatisfactory, then the assessor can reissue the outstanding questions after a debrief. And for the portfolio, it can be resubmitted, but will have to be entirely resubmitted, as it's not workable to submit just the areas at issue. So if they weren't able to achieve it, they'd have to really go back and do it all again.
And Pat, that's how it worked in my TAFE course. You pretty much summed it up. If people struggled with a component of the course, that's what happened.
Okay, great. That's good to know. I'll give that a tick.
Yeah.
And so that, the written questions, sorry. Now the written questions were where the gaps were in the unit of competency, as in the stuff that I hadn't covered off. So the written assessment questions, if my contents page is correct, should be on page 13. Those chips. Okay. Written assessment questions. Okay. Now the idea of the written assessment questions is they will cover off any areas that weren't covered by the portfolio or the observations. There's only 4 questions, and the way the assessment works here, if you look at page 13, there's the questions, and we're for the candidate to write their answers in, which is there, the space, and then there's a satisfactory yes, no, and the assessor comments. If you go further on to page 15, there's the marking guide for the assessment questions. and this is where the assessor, and the idea here is that any assessor could pick this up and do it. So it wouldn't be unique to me as having written the assessment questions. Anyone could, who was qualified to do the assessment, would be able to pick this up and run with it. So what I've done there is I've obviously repeated the questions down the left-hand side of on page 15, and then on acceptable answers on the right-hand side, there is what I consider to be the answers, any or all of those. Not any, one would probably not be enough, but if you show enough information as an acceptable answer that is covered by those acceptable answers, well then, to my mind, that would be a satisfactory response.
Yeah. Lots of great detail in there, Pat.
Yeah.
And Pat, for question 3, what is the most appropriate application to produce spreadsheets? I'm taking that as just really a very general question. You know, you'd have specific applications for perhaps specific types of spreadsheets, but
I think generally speaking, Ross, a spreadsheet is a spreadsheet. It's a bit like that. So, I mean, Excel's the most ubiquitous one. Everyone knows.
and that's what I use.
Everyone knows Excel. But back in the day, Lotus 123 was the original.
Yep.
You probably remember that, I'm sure.
I do.
Which doesn't exist anymore. It's now called Symphony. OpenOffice Libre is that's an open source version which is free, and I've used that. It's actually pretty good. And Google Sheets is something I think a lot of students use. Google Sheets, it's my understanding. Again, I'm pretty sure it'd be free. Don't have to buy expensive Office licenses for that. So they're the 4 that I could find by doing a bit of research. You're right, there would definitely be more. And there might be really specific, like maths ones for astrophysicists and whatnot, but
Yeah.
I think you'd be amazed if you delve into to Excel, how much detail is in there, how much you can create. Like, it's a pretty incredible system, really. Now the only other question that I sort of didn't address with the other one was the difference between cloud and non-cloud based applications, and that is part of the assessment as a portfolio. Is you would be required to save your work on a USB stick, which would be non-cloud, as well as onto a network, which would be the cloud. So that was just like a demonstrable thing saying, I know what the cloud is, I know how to save stuff to it, as well as saying I know how to save something locally. So that was pretty much, that's pretty much it for the first one. Any comments, questions?
Well, I like the detail on there, and if I was an assessor myself, I would feel very comforted with your acceptable answers list on there, in terms of giving me an understanding that yes, that's okay, I can mark someone competent,
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of not marking someone competent if they don't provide evidence that they actually are competent.
Yep.
To me, that's a really good list to work with.
Oh, good, thank you.
And Pat, I read through it and it looked really, I thought it was pretty comprehensive, and it there was no, there are no gaps that I could think of. Having worked with our finance areas for a long time, I thought it was pretty good. Well done.
Thank you. Trish, any comments? I know this wasn't your strong suit, the spreadsheet, but
She's competent now, Pat. This is going to be her new thing.
They're going to try.
she doesn't realise, but all her invoices are on Excel. She doesn't actually realise.
I do so. I did.
When I am someone else's competence. You can't tell me competent in everything.
I just said to Pat earlier, I wasn't sure what WHS is. See, I'm used to occupational health and safety, but I haven't heard of the workplace one. Yeah, and it was an acronym, but it didn't say what it was. So, but it's very clear and very practical description.
Well done.
Okay, thank you. What I thought, if it's okay, I'll do the next one and then stop and then start another Zoom just to do the last one, because I think we're already up to 22 minutes. So we're probably going to run out of Zoom space. It only gives us 40 minutes. So the next one I'd like to address is BSBINM 202, handling mail.
Yep.
Now, I think I'll just go from the start to the finish. It might be smarter than jumping all over the place. So the instructions to assessors, where the assessment will take place, and this one was a little bit different because the way I approached it was doing a job like mail handling, working in a mail room. It's pretty hard to recreate that or simulate it. You've really got to be doing it. So one of the assessment options available is third-party observation, and that's where you either have yourself, another assessor, or a supervisor, a workplace manager can have a list and they can assess the person's competence based on their actual work rather than anything that's simulated. And given most of the unit's criteria were based around handling mail, like being able to understand where mail comes from, where it's got to go within the enterprise, you know, whether they have a series of pigeonholes or whether they have whatever mail system they choose to use. It's almost impossible to recreate that without the person being in the job itself. So this one only had 2 assessment instruments. It was third-party observation of the actual work practices and some some written questions as well. And the written questions were to be issued to the candidate at the conclusion of the observation session. So after they'd finished the observation with the supervisor or workplace manager, they would then sit down and go, okay, here's your questions to finish off the assessment. This went on the background of the candidate, what sort of employee they were, you know, someone who, like that guy who ran Maya, started in the mailroom and worked his way up. Don't even know if they have mailroom people anymore. Is that still a thing?
Still do, Pat. When I left the bank, which was only 2 years ago, we still had a mail room.
There you go.
We used to have about 6 people in it, down to 2 or 3, but it still functions.
There you go. So,
and what you said is correct. When someone new started, basically they were shadowed for a week by one of the existing mailroom staff.
Okay.
I'm sure they knew what they were doing.
I'm not sure how widely used this unit of competency is actually, like how many people actually go out and say, oh, I want to get the unit of competency in handling mail, but it's there.
Well, you'd actually be surprised. You know, certainly at the bank, often, you know, there are people who, you know, may have gone to a special school, something like that,
yeah.
and it actually was a career path for them to come in and actually gain employment. So I think you'd actually be surprised.
Yeah, I think Telstra was a bit like that actually.
Yeah.
Now I think back to it, there was that was the case. Yeah.
And learning through doing is such a big part of so much learning.
Yes, I think it's the best way. Personally, I think it's certainly any practical skill. It's learning by doing is the best way to do it.
Oh, that's how I learn.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm more of a visual person, so to be shown what to do, I can relate to that. And I still use that sometimes when I'm with my job. When we shadow each other, I always make sure I'm actually doing the role and they tell me what to do, so then I can remember. Yes.
Well, that's kinesthetic learning. You know, I don't learn unless I do.
Yes.
Hence my son's frustration with me when he shows me something on the computer and then I can't do it because I haven't actually done it.
And he probably does it at 1,000,000 miles an hour. There you go.
I can't even see what he's doing, let alone actually tolerance on his part for me to actually do it.
You know, there was, sorry.
Go on.
Oh, just the restrictions to assessment. There was just the possibility that time might be a factor because when you're actually doing it in the workplace, and it might depend on the workload, what's coming in, what's going out, depend on the time available by the supervisor. So there could be a restraint there, but I think by and large it wouldn't be that hard to get the assessment done in one chunk of time, given that most mailrooms would probably have a time where mail comes in and a time when mail goes out. The only other thing would be the urgent stuff where it's a one-off, or someone comes down and says, I need this, sent urgently. So they might be, you may have to wait for that type of occurrence. But generally speaking, it should all be able to be done in one hit.
Yeah.
The only other thing I'd mention, Pat, is certainly, and I'm not sure if this is relevant to your course or not, but the mail-in people actually went into every part of our operation. So in some parts of the operation, they actually had to be very aware of the security requirements,
Okay.
around that particular part of the operation, whether it was in investment banking, and not to let people come in the door behind you, all those sorts of things. I don't know if that's relevant or not.
Yeah, I know, absolutely.
Something I know our mail-in people had to be aware of.
Yeah, I think there was an area there with the workplace health and safety. There was something that I mentioned about security. I can't remember where I did put it, but it might pop up. But I certainly was, mindful of the fact that, particularly with packages and dangerous potential for unwanted stuff to be coming in, there could be that. But I must admit I didn't address the security aspect of it, so that's very good, thank you.
So hearing you talk security, Ross, also makes me think confidentiality. Would that come up?
Well, that's part of it, security, confidentiality. You're right, and that's why I mentioned the investment banking area, for instance. They really had to be careful about, who they delivered mail to, and, to make sure that nobody came in the door behind them, and that, that if they came across information, they'd had to be kept confidential.
Yep. No, that's really good.
That is a good point. Because as I said, the mailroom people had access to the entire operations.
Oh, power.
Absolutely.
Wow.
I feel like I read something.
Yeah, there's something in there, but anyway, we'll push on. So there's the next part is workplace health and
A
safety.
bit of a red herring, but just...
No, it's good. No, it's really good, because I actually don't know that that's mentioned in the unit of competency, to be perfectly honest, and it probably should be.
Especially today.
Yeah, in today's, I honestly don't think there was anything specifically about confidentiality or security, but
Well,
I'll check that out. But I've written those as notes to add in. With the workplace health and safety, expected to observe all the guidelines, rules and policies of their workplace during the assessment. There are no workplace health and safety areas for the written questions, other than that they be conducted in a safe environment with as little to distract the candidate as possible. So that applies to any type of assessment. You've got to they've just removed the 40-minute time limit on us.
yes, I got a little reminder set upgraded, and now we have unlimited time.
Oh, there we go.
Unlimited minutes.
A gift from
So
Zoom.
Pat can keep talking till about 11 p.m.
Well, yeah, I just realised that I didn't hit the record button until now.
Oh no!
But I've got 2 cameras going, so I think that'll be enough.
Three times.
I'm going to use one of the other ones, don't worry. So the results are available to the candidate either on the day of the observation and written questioning, or the day after. Timing would be just dependent on when the assessment takes place, whether it be in the morning or in the late afternoon, where someone might say, well, I'll finish this tomorrow. Not yet competent. Assessment is assessed as not yet competent. The third party observer will work with the candidate to upskill in deficient areas. The candidate will then be given the opportunity to be reassessed in the deficient skill areas only, and will not be required to undertake the entire assessment again. And that seems to be a precept of most vet assessments, that they're very big on getting people over the line. They want people to be competent, they want people to advance their careers, they want people to advance their education. So from what I've read and studied so far, it's very much a push that they want you to succeed. So they don't want to hold people back by saying, oh, you're deficient in one area, you've got to go back and do it all again. That's not how it rolls. So I've taken that concept and put it into these assessments as well. So there's no like pass fail. That's why they call it competent or not yet competent. So, and I think I got that from you, Paul, too. You mentioned it to me.
Yes, another little acronym, NYC.
NYC. I've been that a few times.
City.
Exciting. I've just done a little segue here to the elements and
Yeah.
the performance criteria around the first element, which would cover off, I would say, what we just talked about. 1.3, identify and distribute learning and confidential mail in accordance with organisational requirements.
Yep.
So that would be, in terms of policy around respecting confidentiality, I'd be suggesting that that covers that off.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point actually. Yeah, covers those. But yeah, I just thought it might have been more specific, but you
More overt.
yes. So the assessment method in this one is two parts: a third-party observation in the actual workplace, as I said, plus some written questions. Just go through the competency mapping, just flick through it. As you can see, the elements, performance criteria and assessments are all laid out, and each of those is given an assessment item, whether it be a third party, a written question, or that in this case there's only those two. And so that's that part of it. Then we move on to the written assessment questions. Again, which is page 9. Same setup. You've got the questions, the opportunity for the candidate to write the answers, and the opportunity for the assessor to mark it. And on the next, on page 11 is the marking guide. Same deal as the first one. You've got the question again, then you've got the acceptable answers, which is laid out on the right hand side. That's where question 2, Ross, that's where we talked about that. Briefly outline what kinds of legislation might apply to mail handling practices. Suspicious package, normal mail packages, domestic and overseas deliveries. And I just wrote legislation related to privacy, manual handling legislation, dangerous goods, customs, legislation related to the postal service, counter-terrorism law and equal opportunity laws. I guess counter-terrorism and that sort of stuff addresses the security aspect at least. Not so much privacy, and I should have put privacy in there, definitely. And I'll put that in there.
Yeah, I would. It's a growth area.
Well, it's quite topical at the moment, the postal service, in America at least wise anyway. It's a very big deal.
So are you saying that you would include that in a different section with the instructions to assessors?
No, I would.
Leave that there?
I'll leave it here, and I'll just say as part of the kinds of legislation, I would say that privacy legislation, which is it's its own entire set of legislation on privacy. That would be.
You've actually got it there, Pat. Yeah.
Question 2, acceptable answer. You go to the top. It's the first.
Oh, privacy. There you go. I didn't even say it.
Look, you think.
Yeah. So they're the acceptable answers. It's just fairly self-explanatory, I would hope. That's the aim of it. The third-party evidence, this is the one where the supervisor or manager would go through. And again, these are just the elements broken up that ensure the incoming mail is checked and registered. That's a little thing on its own. Each one of these is sort of independent, but they obviously make up the whole how you run a mailroom or how you actually operate inside a mailroom. So that's, little room for comments. Can they do it? Yes, no, not assessed. And then I think one thing I haven't mentioned yet.
I'm just curious. That's a really good checklist in terms of what happens in the mailroom. Did you sort of make that up, or you found it?
What I've done, Ross, is using the competency mappings. So what you do is you take the unit of competency, which is a separate document, and that's got all the unit of competencies in it. So what is required to be competent in this unit, and then I've just taken them and put them into that format, if you like. Right. The only thing you have to think about is how do you get them assessed, whether it be third party or an observation, which may be one and the same really. Would you do it as written questions? Would you do it as simulation? Would you do it as real workplace? there's loads of different assessment instruments you can use. But really, I'm not sure Paul would be better placed to comment on this, but it seems there's probably some that are used all the time, some assessment instruments, and then there's others that are probably rarely used. Would that be a fair comment, Paul? Or?
I think a lot of workplaces do this stuff really poorly
Mm.
in terms of observing someone's competence or lack of. You know, assumptions are made, things aren't trained, delegated, coached effectively so often, and then, you know, I make a mistake.
Yeah.
And then you're my boss and you're telling me off.
Mm.
But really, you haven't
Never taught me.
coached and trained me towards competence.
No, that was something that I think back in Telstra training was pretty poor. And then I compare that to my experience as ambulance paramedic, where training was everything. And you were trained to the nth degree on every little thing. Everything had a 3-page competency attached to it. I know, I mean everything.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting with mail handling because we outsourced all of that. So, you know, they were all private contractors who were operating the mail rooms. So, you know, you sort of were reliant on them to provide you with competent staff. They had to abide by our regulations and so on. But, you know, I guess their base training was handled by the contractor.
And we know what happens when they rely on that third party, hence the fiasco at
Security.
the Bridges Hotel. I think they made that mistake, didn't they? So
There is something to leaders in workshops if they're delegating and they're coaching and it doesn't work, that before you go to blame the person, hold the mirror up to yourself. Is there anything you did as part of the way I trained, coached, delegated to that person that might have ended up in them not being competent?
no doubt. And I think there is a balance. I mean, there is an expectation that if you are paying someone to do something, that it'll be done in some reasonable manner. But maybe that's a mistaken belief. You know, maybe that's.
Even if we don't train people appropriately
Yeah.
and there to support and guide them and ensure there is competence.
Yeah. And I think, well, this.
And if a manager's bonus is at stake, it's never going to be their fault.
No, and that's what it boils down to. You're absolutely right. And if you're a politician, you're going to duck and weave until someone else cops the blame or the storm blows over. And that's
Taking responsibility.
it's a rare thing these days.
We could talk about that for hours, I'm sure.
Is there anything else about the mail handling mail?
No, again, I think your attention to detail, Pat, and the linking between the elements and the performance criteria, and then how you link that with the assessment. I think that's done very thoroughly.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
I think you should sell this to the American.
I'll form a company and come in and revamp the mail room. I'll bring in the Oompa Loompas. Okay, the last one is SITX-CCS-004, which is Provide Lost and Found Services. Now again, this was quite an interesting one because on the face of it, you sort of think, really? You know, but put yourself in a hotel situation where you're running a massive, like 300-room hotel or something. That must happen all the time. You know, there must be this constant flow of lost and found items, and that's it's an important thing to know. So again, similar sort of format. The assessment this time would take place either in a workplace or in a simulated environment, depending on the candidate's circumstances. And I know that's a very broad thing to say, but it's basically saying this is something you could run as a scenario, a lost and found. You know, you don't really need to be in the actual real work environment to run this, because there's nothing wrong with doing a role play of, oh, I've lost something. Oh, I think I lost it in the hotel, or I think I lost it here. Can you help me? Or I've found something. What do you want me to do with this? Or I'm claiming something. They're pretty much the three things that you're going to be faced with. So, the background of the person working in a tourism, travel, hospitality, entertainment. I was sort of thinking around the, festival, what do you call it, My Music Bowl. I think I noticed there was a lost and found or something in the cloakroom. I think it was. I saw a sign for lost and found because you weren't allowed to take bags in. You had to check, everything had to be checked in. So that is the sort of things I was thinking about as to who would need to be assessed in this sort of field. Restrictions, it would only be I imagine delays if it was conducted in an actual workplace, because you might not get any action if you're sitting there waiting for something to happen. I can relate to that when I was doing the ambulance. I had to do our advanced driving. We had to have someone sit with us in the car and do a code 1 drive, what they call. 3 days went by where the person came, we didn't get a single one. So he wasted 3 days of his time sitting with us waiting for us to get a job where we had to single one someone to hospital. Finally it happened. And, thank God someone got hit by a car. Anyway, I digress. So the workplace observances, again, similar to what you mentioned, Ross, earlier. It's whatever environment you're in, you've got to observe the workplace health and safety regulations. That there's obviously some workplaces are far more dangerous than others, and that's obviously a very important thing. And the other thing I did mention in the workplace health and safety area was dangerous goods and fraud. They're the only 2 things I thought about in this scenario where someone might hand you, I think I found a bomb, or someone comes in and tries to skive someone's wallet or someone's valuables because they might have seen someone hand it in, and I'm sure that goes on. Results.
Can I ask a question to you, and you might have covered it off later on, but in terms of workplace policy around, say I found a wallet with $1,000 in it, is there anything in there around not about stealing or not?
Not really, Paul. I guess, it's a good question. I think I think the way I was thinking was it just comes under the moral compass. Some people, I guess, would go to their way to do it. Some people wouldn't. It probably is worth mentioning. Absolutely, it should be. It should be something that is probably brought to the attention of any new employee, especially the hospitality in those sort of areas where you might come across valuables. I'm sure in the bank, there's probably a big emphasis on making sure people are honest or try and push that honesty. But I know the way I sort of think about that is, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. It doesn't matter what people say to you. But good point. Good point.
2.1 of the performance criteria: conduct all communication with property owner in a professional manner. So I mean, you could argue that covers it off.
I could easily put honesty in there as well, couldn't I? Professional, honest manner. Because I think it's definitely worth putting in there. No question.
Well, it happens all the time. Having worked in hospitality, the amount of text that goes on.
Yeah. Oh, can only imagine. It was only recently Trish, for the first time in her life, sent money in the mail. It took 3 weeks to get from here to Torquay. She paid $10 express post. But it got there, amazingly enough. It actually got there.
Hey Paula, do you remember when you stayed at a hotel and you took your little selection of little perfumes? Oh, they weren't stolen, you left them behind, but you couldn't get them back. Do you remember how you can buy a little pack and there's little sample perfumes? I reckon that was in China. Was that in China or in Ballarat, or big difference?
Not sure, somewhere.
Does that ring a bell?
Vaguely.
Yeah, your whole pack of it.
Pat and Trish, didn't you leave a pillow or something at Birmingham?
Oh,
A pillow.
I left the pillow in Tasmania.
Pat's left stuff everywhere.
Strawn Caravan Park. I still want it back.
Oh my
Best
god.
pillow I ever had.
Pat left his makeup bag, but it was, had bathroom bag. Toilet bag. But it had important stuff in it.
I left my iPad at Birmingham too.
Oh my god.
That was the last time we were up there.
That was it.
Oh jeez.
Yeah.
You did get it back, didn't
I
you?
did,
No,
yeah.
they were great.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I left a pair of pants in a hotel in Sydney once, but that's another story.
So they were very efficient. So they sent you. So I think we had to send them a prepaid envelope, and the Bermagui, the real estate people that would look after the houses, they would then send. They were really efficient.
Yeah, but we paid for it.
Yeah, that's right. We paid for that.
Yes, because I remember leaving clothes in Sydney or prepared for somewhere with work. I obviously didn't unpack my stuff when I was leaving and left, various items of clothing. But yeah, I had to pay for the postage. But, a staff member could have gone into that wardrobe and thought, oh, nice top, nice pair of somethings. And it's like, oh, no, we never sold them. So that's your honesty.
Yeah, I wonder how much these days with CCTV as well. Like there's probably cameras everywhere, and people probably. I don't know if it's like that in hotels or not. I imagine it probably is. Not in the rooms maybe, but in the hallways and everywhere else. But so anyway, so workplace results. Again, when practicable, not yet competent. Same sort of concept is. Competency is measured by your ability to be able to do something and repeat it, a skill or a knowledge repeatedly and in different environments. Deeming as someone not yet competent doesn't mean they're not fully incompetent, it just means they might have to skill up in certain areas. And so it would be just, okay, you've done this and this and this, but you need to follow up on this. It might be you don't really know how to fill out the lost and found register properly, so we'll address that and then we'll reassess that concept. But your customer service was great. You were able to, speak to people and do all those sort of things really well. You just missed out on the certain. So that's the idea there. And similarly with the written questions, if there's a wrong answer, you just resubmit the question that was wrong. Don't have to do the whole thing again. Timing based on workload, if it was in a work environment. Otherwise, in a simulated environment, it would be fairly short. I would imagine like 20 minutes for the written questions and maybe up to 2 hours to go through simulations of a lost item, a found item, a claimed item, and filling out the registers. Twofold assessment, a practical observation of demonstrable skills and a written question section. The briefing would occur for each assessment prior to their undertaking it, and that's irrespective of whether it be a simulated environment or the real environment. I did note here that I thought that during the observation the candidate may verbalise for confirmation with the observer, who may confirm or reject confirmation but should not lead the candidate too much. So what I meant by that was they can ask a closed question like, is this correct? Get a yes or no answer, but they can't say, what do I do now? So that's what I meant by that sort of, and I'm not sure, what do you think about that idea? It's housekeeping on page 4.
But I don't know, but the observer should not lead. So does that make it
That's
clear?
what I was basically getting at. The observer shouldn't lead, but they can
Guide?
They can guide, guide. Yes, guide. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. So if someone says, "Am I doing this right? Is this right?" They can say yes or no, but they can't. The candidate can't say, "How do I do this?
Yeah.
Can you show me?" That's a basic way of putting it. But
So
I'm probably being pedantic here, but they're saying to add the observer word in there again. So during the observation, the candidate may verbalise for confirmation with the observer, who may confirm or reject confirmation. But the observer should not lead too much. Does that make sense?
Yep.
The observer should not lead the candidate too much. That's the correct word.
what do you think, Ross, of the idea of that? Is that overkill? Should they be no sort of conversation between them, or?
Yeah, look, I know almost more in the school situation, when you're doing assessments, I'm actually told not to, and it's slightly different. But I don't, yeah, I don't think we should be looking to the observer really. I mean, they should be able to either, you know, carry out the action successfully or not. I don't know, Paula, what happens normally in a training session? I would have thought the observers shouldn't really be leading at
No,
all. They're observing to see how the person goes. I mean, you might, you know, I wouldn't have it in. Sometimes you might just nod your head, yes, but
Yeah.
I don't think you should give
Not
them
leading.
too much
Yeah,
guidance.
I wasn't sure whether that was a a good or a bad thing, to be honest. I just thought, well, it's an idea, and I certainly
Now, if they're really not sure and they're looking, I mean, the person by either confirming or rejecting is going to give them the answer.
I guess what I was thinking, the scenario I was imagining was probably in a real work situation. Say you're at a hotel reception desk, someone comes down and says
Oh.
but that wouldn't be probably where you'd be assessing them. You might sort of, but maybe you are. So that's where I was thinking. That was my thinking anyway. But
Yeah.
I certainly agree, prima facie, that it's probably not a great idea to assess people and say, yeah, good on you, mate. But
Well,
Yeah, I mean, typically, as you said, in the workplace, that's what happens. You look for assistance from a more experienced staff member, but I'm just, during an assessment, I'm not sure.
What was Paul going to say?
Paul,
no, I would say you shouldn't. Yes, so it's the observer should not lead the candidate because if you're leading them, they might not be competent.
And that's probably all you need to say, Pat. During the observation, the observer should not lead the candidate. You could, I don't know that you'd lose anything by taking out.
and just leave it like that.
maybe
Leave it.
four.
Yeah, that's just leave that in. Yep, should not lead the candidate, and just nothing more. It's always been my problem. Verbal diarrhea.
The observer should not lead. During the observation, the observer should not lead the candidate too much as to the correct course of action. I think that's.
I'll just leave it at that.
No worries. Got it. Thank you. So questions. The assessment is open-ended in terms of question time. The question's only 4 or 5 questions. Nothing too onerous. Just moving on, the same principle when it comes to competency mapping. Each of the units of competency have their own elements and performance criteria. These are broken down and then given an assessment item. And as you can see, their practical observation is pretty much everything except for the last couple on page 7, where I felt that these questions or these criteria could be more suited to written questions. So I've got there, demonstrated knowledge required to complete tasks outlined in elements of performance of this unit, for lost and found items, organisational procedures for providing services, methods to succinctly and clearly record details. So that was done as a question, and similarly methods to trace items and determine ownership, methods to locate items and determine ownership, typical storage facilities, security requirements, so on and so forth. And the assessment conditions.
Just out of interest, is there a time limit on how long you hold things? I mean, what happens if you're, I don't know, at a hotel and something's been in your lost and found for a year?
I don't know that there's a legislated time limit. I don't know. I might have actually covered something about that further on.
You would think there would be an expiry date of holding on to something, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I'd like to think if you were assessing someone's competence that it's in line with company policy, that I would know, I work in this hotel, this is what we say, we hold on to things for 2 months.
Yeah,
That you're not, as the employee.
could be a local
that-
policy, maybe.
that.
Yeah. So on we go with the questions. So there's the questions, the room for the answers. This on page 9. And here I've laid out the acceptable answers, similar setup. And I'm wondering whether I even put anything in here about time limits.
Again, lots of great detail in there, Pat.
Yeah, it's there's a whole wild world out there of lost and found services and criteria therefore. So it's just a matter of trying to pick through and find what you think is the most appropriate answers. But again, it's just a matter of any or all of those answers. Not any, like one wouldn't probably be sufficient. But if someone demonstrates that they get the idea of what's been requested, I think that's more than enough. You don't have to go into absolute minutiae, as long as you can demonstrate you know what the question is getting at. And the practical observation is instructions at the front for the assessor, the candidate, the brief description of the tasks at hand, and then there's the observation points, and they again go back to what's in the unit of competency. So again, and if you read through those, not that I expect you to read through them exactly, but you can see how you could actually do this in a scenario. You wouldn't have to wait for a live situation. You could easily recreate this in a scenario situation. So if you had a group of hotel workers doing this course, you just role play, set them up in their groups of 3 or whatever, and away you go. And that's how we used to run sort of scenarios when I was in the ambulance service. We would do that. Work off in pairs or triples or as a group and recreate as faithfully as possible what the observation was trying to achieve. And we all found that, I think probably again it's like learning by doing, because you get as close as you sort of can. Like I've even been dragged out of a car on a spine board, a wrecked car at the, what was it? SES have got a training ground down Peninsula somewhere, and you've got all these wrecked cars, and you put yourself in all these terrible positions, and you've got to, all your teammates, classmates got to get you out. And yeah, it's good fun. Yeah.
Now, Pat, I'm looking at something here, and I might be a bit pedantic,
No.
but acceptable answers on page 11.
Yep.
You have most of your points in capitals, but a few are lowercase.
Ah, yes. Yes, I see what you mean. So just tidy up the grammar.
Being pedantic, they might say, well, why is this? Does it mean it's not as important or whatever? But most of it in capitals.
I must
But
be.
on that one. But as I say, I'm being pedantic there.
Oh no, it's fine. It's I haven't put little ticks on the last one either.
Okay, haven't noticed that. Well done.
So that covers the observation points. Cover what the written questions don't. And one thing I didn't mention, and this covers all 3 units, is on each one there's evidence record for recognition of prior learning assessment, and that every unit of competency in the VET system has that opportunity for people to demonstrate that they've got a prior learning, and this is how this is my prior learning history, this is what I know, and therefore I should be exempted from doing certain courses or unit parts of the courses. But I think in reality, if you're doing an entire course, it might be relevant. But if you're doing single units here and there, I just don't see how you could do it. To be frank,
Look, I've been told many times that the RPL, more little acronyms, the recognition of prior learning process is so tedious that to actually do the assessment is easier than to provide evidence that you are competent.
and yet they insist on making a big deal of it all the time. It keeps coming up time after time after time. RPL. And it's so. Well, this has all been videoed. I shouldn't say this, but it's all this PC. Yeah, it's like.
What was some word I use?
There's a lot of that in this world, this education world. So probably not unexpectedly, but look, it's you might see a scenario where someone's come from overseas and they've got degrees coming out the, whatever, and they have legitimate grounds to say, I have got prior learning, but I think there are certain times where it's relevant and certain times where it certainly isn't. And from what you've said, it's probably really hard to get across the line anyway. So,
Yeah.
but it's there, and if someone wants to try and claim it, so be it. I'm not sure exactly how you would assess it, but it's, like you said, it'd be easier just to go and do the damn thing.
Yes.
Um,
Well, I think, yeah.
Okay, well that's that one. Now, all that's left is there's an evaluation checklist which I gave you guys, and just if you don't mind just filling it in, and I can come and pick it up, or if you can be bothered scanning it, either or, I'm happy to go and come and grab it though. Some of the
I'll
questions.
just drop it back, Pat.
Oh, thanks, Ross. That'd be terrific.
So this means that we have done what?
Well, this is the interesting thing. So what I guess how to write this is what you felt about the assessments, like just in a general way. Like obviously we haven't, this is what I find this a bit difficult. Like question 2 for us, for instance, was there anything in the assessment that you felt needed more training before being assessed? Well, you haven't done the training. So if you follow me, this is written as if someone has done the training course. This whole course is geared towards people who are in a vocational role within an industry or enterprise or whatever. So I'm the trainer, I want to be the trainer, I'm doing this course so I can become the trainer. But at the meantime I'm still probably doing or assisting with training or whatever it might be. So it's a bit tricky if you're not in that environment, because it's almost like you've got to pretend that you are.
Yeah. Are you looking for yes/no answers in this, or?
I think just comments, Ross. Just like for instance, question 3: were the chosen assessment activities a good way to assess what you had learnt? Well, if you sort of think, well, if I'd done these units, do you feel like, for instance, with the spreadsheet, would replicating a templated spreadsheet a good way to be assessed? Would
Right, so we're effectively doing this as if we'd done these courses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All 3, or can we just choose
just
one?
generally, just generally. You don't have to be specific. You can it's just general responses. But if you want to make a point of any one of them, that's fine. The adjustments, like you could even say that we did the adjustments during the session. But if there's anything, and please be fully honest if you think, and please be pedantic, Paula, if there's things like you say, well, some of the formatting wasn't as good as it could be on the assessments, because you're going to read it, and if you felt that it didn't sort of indicate what was important, what wasn't, as the assessor, or the learner, whichever side of the fence you're on, I think clarity is everything. Let's be as clear as possible. So.
Poetic license here.
Yeah.
Number 12, we've just covered it off. That can be an easy yes. Were we informed that the RPL process was available to us?
Yes. I'd left that outside to put that in late. That's why I made a point of it.
And Trish, Pat's lucrative new career is just around the corner.
And there's just one other one, which is 7. Do you think the assessment is the right level of difficulty for the qualification? There's a thing called the Australian Qualifications Framework, which I know Paula's very well knows all about it. But what I would answer to that, this is from my perspective, is there's nothing in there that's not on the unit. So I haven't added in anything, I haven't made anything, I haven't embellished anything. It's all exactly what is in the unit. So I haven't sort of given a degree, put degree questions for a certificate or anything like that.
No, so keeping it, I think there's simple, short comments.
Yeah, keeping it simple, but not going, and this is from the assessment perspective, there's nothing haven't made it harder. That's one thing that I feel there's an emphasis on, is you really trying to get people into wanting to learn, wanting to do qualifications, wanting to educate themselves more, and probably the best way to do that, well, it seems to be, is assist them as much as you can to get those competencies. So, you know, from an industry, it's obviously from industry's point of view, they want people who are competent to get out there into the workforce ready to go. And that's apprenticeships, that's, you know, all sorts of different vocational things. But there's no point, whilst there's no point putting people out there who don't know what they're doing, there's no point making it really hard for people either. Because that's, you know, that doesn't achieve anything either. So I think that's where you think, well, make it as hard as it needs to be, but no harder. That's, I guess that's
Not
yeah.
like the TAE qualification test.
No.
It's pretty hard.
I'm juggling 3 assessments at the moment.
Oh gosh.
And
Pretty well.
this hasn't even finished yet. I've got more to go on this. So,
Blimey.
but I think that'll do. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I'm
Yeah,
just hoping the cameras are still running.
Working to it reads really well, so well done.
Oh, thank you very much, Ross. Appreciate that, and thanks, Paula, for your time. Yeah, well, I'll get this one done hopefully. And I've got who wants to come to 3 40-minute presentations on first aid?
Put a little well done pat up there on the face.
Oh dear. All right. Well, thanks again.
Thanks,
Okay.
Pat.
Okay.
Thanks, Paula.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you,
Amy.
Ross. See you, Paula.
Bye.
Bye.
Well,
I'll see
Yeah.
you Sunday.
Bye.
okay,
Bye.
Jackie, Thursday.
Oh, good
See you then.
This is gone. My
Bye.
little comment come up on the chat.
Here we go. Well done. Thank you very much.
Ah.
You're very well. You know how to work this.
I
I'm
know.
all over the place.
I didn't know, you know.
You know, for me to see someone else using share screen and putting something up, because I'm the one doing it all the time, so it's actually really nice to be on the receiving end of it.
It's a fantastic system, isn't it? It's
Oh,
quite easy to
Well,
use.
Because I wouldn't be doing any work, but you know, because I get people all the time, they put, you know, if there's 8 people in the room,
Yeah.
can you come up with one word to describe X?
Yep.
And they all put the